once, I think, which was the memorial for Mr. Dance after he died. It was coincidentally, I was in London just that week and I saw something come in and I decided to go along, which was a nice opportunity just to meet some of my old teachers, believe it or not, which was the only other time I've been back at school. So thank you ever so much for remembering me. That's very, very much appreciate that. Yeah, it's 5 a.m. here, but I'm up bright and early, and I'm just going to do my best to take you through a little bit of my journey, if I may, and also talk to you about my writing. So I'd like to just spend a few minutes going through that, and let's keep it informal because we're a very small number of people. So feel free to put your hand up or just interrupt me with a question if something comes up as we go. And it's really nice to see a few old names. I can just remember or recognize the names on my screen already. So it's really nice to see some of you. So a little bit about myself. So I'm Mohammad, as Isabel was saying. I joined St Dunstan's in 1977, which was in P6, the last year of prep school. Mr. Townsend, I think, was the teacher in that class, and I left in '85 after finishing my my A levels. A bit about myself. So I was born in Southeast London, grew up in Southeast London, mainly initially in Lewisham. Some of you may remember there used to be an Indian restaurant on Lehigh Road called Curry Queen. Don't know if any of you had ever seen it. It's not there anymore. So my dad opened that in the '60s. So my parents were both migrants to the UK from what is now Bangladesh. So they were born in what was then British India, then Pakistan, then it became Bangladesh in after a civil war in '71. So we were the first generation to be born in the UK. I was born in '66. Grew up in Southeast London. Grew up actually first place we lived was upstairs from the restaurant. But then we lived in Lee, and then by the time I moved to St Dunstan's. I think I lived in Bromley, so pretty much was there for the next few years. I think the time when we grew up, it was a completely different era to what it is today. So I guess some of this is just going to take us back to that era, because the book I'll talk about is a memoir, and it does actually have an initial setting in that growing up period of my life, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. So I live in Melbourne, as Isabel was saying. I hope you can still hear a London accent there somewhere, but I believe it's more or less gone. I live in London. I have a wife and two great boys, aged 15 and 9. They're both at school. And because they're both school-going age, and they both go to like a private boys' school here in Melbourne, we do talk about school a lot, weirdly enough. So weirdly enough, I'll be telling them something or other about something or other that happened at St Dunstan's once a week. It comes up quite often at this stage of our lives, so it's quite nice. And I've sort of had a bit of a itinerant life around the world, so very much sort of Southeast London route. But then, as Isabel was saying, I sort of started my career with PwC in the UK as an economist. But then fairly soon after that, moved to the US, to Washington, where PwC sort of sent me on a secondment to the Washington office, and I was basically seconded into the World Bank and spent about 3.5 years there, working mainly on sort of economic reform programs in Africa, mainly in Ghana and Nigeria, sort of coming and going from Washington. And then got back to the UK after that, sort of very late '90s, and joined the firm's telecoms practice. And then since then until now, I've pretty much worked in the digital technology and communications industries. So a few more years at PwC, really just working on the reforms that were happening in the internet and the telecom sector all over the world. So advising in countries like Saudi Arabia, Kenya, Nigeria, Slovakia, Poland, Slovenia, Pakistan, and sort of many other parts of the world, really just architecting the ways in which government was deregulating these industries, privatizing them, advising a lot of operators in going into these markets to buy up operations like the likes of Vodafone or Deutsche Telekom or IBM. Did a lot of work with these companies on both sides, if you like, of the fence. And then went to IBM for a few years, still based in London, but doing lots of stints. I did a stint in the US in New York, stint in South Africa, and then spent some time at Vodafone Group, based in Egypt, helping manage the Egyptian operation, and then a bit more of a corporate role across the company back in London, and then rejoined PwC, ran their practice in India, their telecoms, media, and tech practice in India, for 3 years. Then spent a year as cabinet advisor to the Myanmar government before the democratic elections, just to help them open up their whole internet and mobile sector, which is now all being rolled back, unfortunately, after the coup. So very sad to see that. And then ran the firm's Southeast Asian telecoms, media, and tech practice, and then across all of that part of Asia and Australia, and then moved to Australia. Been here for 6 years now. And last year I left PwC, decided to start my own firm, which is called Long Street Advisors, and we focus very much on these topics. I'm building a team to do that, and just coming to the end of the first year of that business soon, and that's enjoying that. Now, about the book and about the journey. So I'd like to just tell you a bit about that. So as you can probably, and the reason why I sort of told you a bit about my background and what my journey's been was to sort of set you up a little bit for the book. So the book's called Border Crossings. Here it is. That's the sort of, it was published just a couple of years ago, and it got republished a few months ago in Australia as a paperback with a new cover. And I can show you another one, which was republished a few months ago in Asia, and it's about to get translated into Arabic and published in the Middle East next year. So the book's done really well. The reason for the book is because probably because of the journey I've just explained. So as you can tell, it's probably a bit of a cross-cultural journey. So, I grew up on those streets of Southeast London that we all remember, like Catford and Lewisham and so on, and grew up at a time when it was probably a bit difficult, if you like, to be brown-skinned, to be following a faith that's a little bit different to most other people's faith that you would meet at that time. It was quite a challenging period, and brought up all sorts of trade-offs, all sorts of negotiations that you had to do with yourself, pretty much, as to how do I handle this situation. That would come up very often in my life, both at school, but also in and around school and in my life. So life was, I didn't think about life like that at the time. I was 9, 10, 15 years old. I was just getting through every day and getting through life. But when I look back on it, I reflect on it as being a period when every day was a bit of an interesting negotiation, let's put it that way. And then as I went through life, I think because all of us are the beneficiaries of this amazing, Western education that we've all had, going to St Dunstan's or other schools like that, where we've been taught, how to think, how to ask questions, how to check facts, all the things that we now probably think are really important. We've been taught to think like that when we've been younger, and of course the way we thought about that was a bit of a clash with how my parents and my older generation wanted us to think, because they came from a different background where they'd been educated in different ways, a bit more rote learning, if you like, and when they wanted us to very much follow a culture and a tradition and our religious faith. And I very much respected that. But I also clashed with it, because when my parents would say, oh, you need to read the Quran in Arabic, the Quran being the sort of holy book of Muslims. I'm sure you all know. I'd sort of go, well, why do I need to read it in Arabic? Because I don't understand Arabic. So we learned how to read Arabic at a young age. Like I was probably 5 when I started learning how to read Arabic script, and I can read it fluently. I speak Arabic fluently now because I learned it later, but at the time I could read it but not understand it. So for me, that was like, why do I need to read possibly the most important text that my parents are telling me is central to my faith? Why do I need to read it in a language where I don't actually understand what it's saying? So to me, that was a bit odd. Not in a disrespectful way, but more like in a curious way. Like I'd rather understand what I'm reading. But the answer was no, you need to read it in Arabic. So we could read translations, but we need to read it in Arabic. All good. So those things created clashes, right? And at the same time, I think being at school created clashes as well, because, some of my friends would be going out having a drink, when I'm like 15, 16, 17. Earlier on, we'd be served pork sausages at lunch, and I'm like, I can't really eat that. It's against my religion. I wasn't really sure about the meat. There would be times where, we'd be involved in some sort of activity at school where I'd feel a bit uncomfortable because of a slightly different cultural view about things. Like, for example, just getting changed in changing rooms after sports, because in my tradition, in my religious tradition, privacy is quite important. You're not really supposed to undress in front of everybody. It's like, so for me, by the time I'm like 11 or 12, I'd find it quite difficult to go into the changing rooms and get changed, which then made it really awkward, which then meant people would look at me and start taking the mick out of me, saying, oh, there's something wrong with him, right? So there were all these issues every day that we would face. So fast forward about 15 or 20 years to when I'm in my early 30s. And by this stage, so I've already worked in 30 or 40 countries, and I'm currently working in the Middle East quite extensively. So this is the early 2000s. I'm advising on Saudi Arabian internet and telecom reforms. And I'm spending months and months, like flying to Riyadh every week from London, sitting in meetings where the clients are speaking in Arabic. And at that sort of point, I sort of thought, I should learn this language. Like I've been struggling with this whole issue for years, and I'm now exposed to it in a business environment. I should just learn the language. So I went off and started learning Arabic, and took it on pretty seriously. I became fluent in Arabic in about 2 years. I sort of took classes in London, became pretty fluent in 2 years, including having a teacher in Damascus at the time for my conversational Arabic learning. This is way before the war. Okay, so I did all that. And then once I did that, I started traveling around the Middle East and writing, and just writing about my travel experiences. And I put my writing together and I sent it to this journalist called Robert Fisk. I don't know if any of you have heard of Robert Fisk. Died about 2 years ago. You can see a couple of nods there. He was the chief Middle East correspondent for The Independent and an amazing journalist. So I sent my writings to Robert Fisk. I don't know what possessed me, but I sent it to him. He wrote back to me with 3 pages of feedback, like about all the mistakes I'd made about Lebanon, and then also just sort of saying, I like your writing and let's meet up. So I met him. And he basically said to me, I like the fact that you write about Lebanon and Damascus and so on. He said, you're not Mark Twain. He said, Mark Twain lived and wrote in Damascus, and you're not Mark Twain, but you have something that Mark Twain and I don't have, which is we are sort of white people who studied the Middle East, and we know the Middle East, but you have a way of being welcomed in to people's homes because you speak 3 or 4 languages. You're somehow culturally just very adept at getting into things, and that comes out in your writing. So he said that you need to exploit that. So that left me thinking, like, okay, well, what do I do with this writing? So what I thought about was that the thing that he's really telling me is that I've got a lens of looking at things, which is a Western lens, if you like, right? But I'm able to get into situations in different parts of the world which a typical Westerner, if you like, doesn't get in, because I'm able to be a bit bicultural. So I sort of thought, okay, maybe that's the advantage. I thought, okay, maybe there's a book here. That's when I first started thinking about writing a book. But then I thought, what I probably need to do is say a lot more about where this lens came from. And it basically came from the streets of Southeast London, because I grew up in Southeast London, with going to school with many of you, and there were those daily negotiations, those daily cultural issues, those clashes that I had to deal with. That's when I didn't know it at the time, but that's when I cut my teeth learning how to be multicultural, if you like, right? So I went right back to that and I started thinking pretty hard about that, which meant I thought a lot about school, actually, believe it or not. And I thought about those experiences at school and also in and around there. And that's when I started writing the book. So the book's called Border Crossings. It was published in the UK called My Journey as a Western Muslim. It's actually published in Australia just 3 or 4 months ago, Border Crossings, but now the subtitle is My Journey as an Outsider, because I feel as though it appeals to a bigger audience than Muslims. And when it was first published, it sort of felt like it was a Muslim book, which it isn't intended to be. So it's now called My Journey as an Outsider. And if I may, I'd like to sort of interrupt this discussion with a couple of readings. I'm actually going to start with something a bit different. So a bit different to the story I've told you so far. So let me just take you straight there. Heathrow Airport, London. Good morning, sir. Could you step aside, please? I'd like to ask you a few questions. Sure, I reply, rubbing the tiredness out of my eyes, putting up no resistance to the familiar drill. My questioner is evidently a government official undertaking extra surveillance following yesterday's terrorist alerts. I found out about the elevated security at London's airports on BBC News before boarding the crowded British Airways flight 14 hours ago. Where are you arriving from today, sir? Dhaka, Bangladesh, I add, thinking that the sun must be setting there just about now. And what were you doing in Bangladesh, sir? He says with a monotonous drone, leafing through my passport at the same time. I was there on holiday, visiting relatives. I look over the thin-framed, wispy-haired officer as he begins to examine my documents. His drab suit matches the grey, speckled carpet of Terminal 4's arrivals hall. Passengers silently weave through orderly queues, some speaking in muffled voices, and others looking subdued from jet lag. A total contrast to the cacophony of loudspeaker announcements and disorganization of Dhaka Airport. Where Heathrow's carpets snuffle out noise, the gritty wheels of roller bags and lopsided trolleys click-clack across Dhaka Airport's cracked-up tiles. Back in the first world silence of the UK, I'm missing the homely untidiness of Bangladesh, the vibrant colours, humid smells, and incessant raising of voices. From his tired attire, I cannot determine whether the officer is from the Metropolitan Police or British intelligence. He has a kind, bedraggled-looking and spotty face. The thinning hair on his head is longer at the sides than on top. The blemishes on the maroon cover of my British passport include a crease that runs all the way down it, like a white water spring descending a craggy alpine mountain. The officer turns the pages with care, separating the leaves with meticulously shaped fingernails. His professionalism and duty to care momentarily cushion me from the cold reality of my travel experiences today, littered as they are with an incessant amount of scrutiny and suspicion over who I am and why I am traveling. He too asks me about my reasons for traveling so much, about my family origins, and in particular, about my frequent visits to the Middle East. I work for an international consulting firm, and I'm involved in a number of assignments around the world, so I have to fly around frequently. Plus, I travel a lot personally too, to the Middle East and Asia. What about the trips to Syria, sir, and to Lebanon, and Jordan? Were these for business also? As he poses the question, I catch him noticing the gold British Airways frequent flyer identification tag dangling from the strap of my knapsack. He cannot tell that I went to the West Bank last year, since at the conclusion of a 9-hour ordeal at the border crossing, I'd requested the Israeli intelligence agency not to put a stamp in my passport, but to do so on a blank sheet of paper instead. Whilst his questioning is thorough, it is nowhere near as forensic as the Israelis, whose methods are purposeful and meticulous. full of mind games. I don't mention the West Bank trip. Mostly those were holiday trips. One trip to Jordan was for business. I wince at the memory of that awful meeting in Amman some months ago when the executive we were negotiating with walked out of a heated session. Do you have any particular reason for spending so much time in the Middle East? I'm learning Arabic and I like going to the region to practice. And I go to Saudi Arabia from time to time to perform the Muslim pilgrimage at Mecca. I feel a desire to get this questioning over with and to get out of Heathrow and make my way into London. Where were your parents born? The officer asks. My parents, I repeat back, looking at the officer but mumbling the words under my breath. Since childhood, I've been forced to deal with such inquiries, a necessary evil these days for many Muslims who travel a lot, their privilege of anonymity in travel temporarily withdrawn. But as time goes on, I've developed my techniques to a point where I can confidently challenge when needed. You don't really need to know where my parents were born, do you? I reply, nodding my head gently in the direction of my passport, the Queen's coat of arms showing proudly on its cover. I'm employing the same tactic I used successfully when stopped in Milan's Linate airport a few weeks ago. But that was with a smiling and casual Italian immigration officer who just looked like he wanted to practice his English. Today, I fear, I've made an error of judgment by challenging this man barely a few weeks after the 7/7 terrorist attacks in London. The officer looks back at me, speechless. And as the seconds tick by, I wonder what will happen now. That's just a quick extract. So I took you to something slightly different there, which is actually not so much the cultural challenges which are faced, but more the practical challenges which are faced, which is why the book's called Border Crossings. It's really about the physical as well as the cultural, if you like. So life in the 90s and from the 90s until pretty much now, and now getting worse again due to current world events. Traveling around is challenging, to be honest. I sort of travel a lot. I average about 80 to 100 flights a year, and apart from COVID, of course. I have had a very large number of incidents. So the book is basically a bit of a memoir, sort of interspersing childhood. There's plenty about St. Dunstan's in there, by the way, and university, but sort of interspersed with cultural clashes, if you like, drawn from real incidents. What I try to do is get into a bit of detail about that. So the book's done pretty well, actually. It's you guys can be proud of your fellow Dunstonian. It's done pretty well. It's been well reviewed and all the rest of it. So I think I'm sort of going to start beginning to invite you to come in for a bit of discussion, questions, if you'd like to, to do that. I'm happy to carry on, but I feel like I've held your attention for a few minutes and would love to hear from you as well if anybody would like to come in with a question, or I can carry on. So whatever is preferred.